So the first game of the Rugby Championship 2022 is over, and we have our first winner of the series going to the Springboks in a game that felt way better than I was really expecting from them. As a Wales supporter, I'm extremely happy to see that that wasn't the exact Springboks team we were going up against, because this game felt incredibly well managed, organised, felt very sort of grown up as a way to play rugby, and the Springboks coming away with a very decent victory. As we do in these match reports, of course, we'll be going through the first half and then afterwards going through the second half, going over all the key events, some of the key highlights and some thoughts on each half as we were going. But as always, I welcome you guys to drop down in the comments your thoughts on the game, your thoughts on the final score, red card scenarios. Is it a red card? There's lots of things to talk about. Starting off, we didn't have to wait long to the first bit of big injury talk. 43 seconds till Faf de Klerk going off, who seemed to obviously have some sort of game plan that he was just going to be blitzing off the line in defence to take on whoever was in front of him. Unfortunately, getting on the wrong side of the tackle, catching his head on the knee of Caleb Clark, who's got legs built like a horse, so that's going to be a bad issue to be in. Unfortunately going off. Luckily it looked like he was okay. He came back on into the substitutes bench later on in the game, but yeah, looked real bad from the initial hit, but luckily not too damaged, so we hopefully see him in the next game. But to be fair, Hendrickse coming on within the first minute of that game, I thought had a brilliant game. He obviously wasn't going to be expecting to come on till that second half, but brilliantly well managed from him. Now the first half felt like it was really in the swing of the South African team, to be fair. Now I thought they were going to have a bit of an advantage. My final prediction for this game was South Africa to win this game, but not quite in the fashion I was expecting here. The first half hour really going the way of the Springboks. A lot of the set piece areas really good for them, winning the first free kick in terms of the scrum against the head. It was actually a New Zealand scrum that actually led to that first free kick. Now the discipline issues that came from New Zealand, as we'll get into a bit later on, were certainly one of the big pitfalls for New Zealand going through this. The first 10 minutes was all South Africa attack, absolutely trying everything to get through. The New Zealand defence absolutely holding up, actually looked pretty good. They really weren't committing that many men to the breakdown. It was obviously something they've tried to analyse, is that South Africa were committing easily 2, 3, 4 men at every single breakdown. New Zealand just holding off, keeping that wall defence as it got close to that 5-metre line. They really managed to hold out. That was until the first bit of area where it began to break apart. We get to the first try. Kurt Lee Arendse coming in after a high ball from Pollard, managing to knock the ball back, bobbles loosely a bit. Lekanya manages to pick it up, makes a few good metres, offloads out, and we see Arendse go in the corner for the first try of the game, 8 minutes in now. I'm sure for any New Zealand subscribers, this will feel a little bit reminiscent of the Ireland games. Ireland scoring within that first 10 minutes in every test, and South Africa now doing the same. This is clearly something that's been, picked up on by these other international teams now. It's like, if you can just get on that front foot, get attacking, there's the potential to score a try. Now, granted, this one was a bit more loose than what we saw in the Ireland series, but, 7 points is 7 points. Conversion was also successful by Pollard there, so just gave them that nice early lead 10 minutes into the game. South Africa really didn't take their foot off the gas for that entire first quarter. Most of the issues coming now between the 10th and 20th minute are basically penalties going the way of South Africa. New Zealand's just not quite where they wanted to be, especially in terms of the attack. A little bit lax in terms of the attacking front. One of the notes I'd written down here was, although the defensive is holding up pretty well, they're just not getting going anywhere. They were really struggling. They were on the back foot. South Africa were just managing the game nicely, just pinning South Africa back, trying to make them play out of their own half. And New Zealand were only really doing 2-3 phases before just resulting to a kick, or maybe they were getting pinned back in their own 22 and had to resort to a kick constantly. Not really making any ground on foot, which was a real shame. And it didn't really help, but when they had the ball in hand, you had people like Malcolm Marx for the South African team getting a number of turnover penalties in this game. The jackling from him on his 50th cap, absolutely brilliant. Thought he had a superb game. The first line out went wrong for South Africa in the 17th minute, and I think it might have been only a couple that went actually wrong in the game. Both teams, in terms of the set pieces, looked relatively even. The scrum was one of the areas that was slowly beginning to nudge towards South Africa in that first half. There were a couple of penalties won by South Africa. They certainly looked a little bit more on top in that first half, but the later stages of the game, it began to feel a bit more equal. Line-outs were pretty even. I think there was 1 steal each by the end of it, and the rest of them were just successfully thrown to their own man. South Africa, I would say, it looked like they had a slight more advantage in terms of the first half. They looked like they were getting their hands on the ball, but just not managing to steal it. We had to wait 25 minutes for New Zealand to have their first real attack of the game, and it actually came from a South African attack, a lovely kick going in from Damien Valemsa, trying to find this beautiful 50-22 from a good sort of 70 metres out, bouncing right into the 22, kept in by Bowden Barrett. Nice little sharp turn, managing to dodge two defenders, making a good bit of headway back up the field, making a nice little break, couple of offloads. New Zealand attack, again, looking scrappy, not really organised. There wasn't really a line. They were just sort of throwing it to whoever was available. Eventually was let down by a forward pass that just sort of ended that attack for them. And this is where we begin to see a bit of a turning point come in. Now, this is where I thought maybe the game was going to get a bit more interesting. Up until the 28th minute, South Africa had made 0 penalties, and it was looking like South Africa's discipline was really getting going for them. Unfortunately, between that 30th and 40th minute, 4 penalties and just these compound errors that were just letting New Zealand off a little bit. They were keeping New Zealand pinned back in their own 22 so well, and just a couple of these issues here. They got a nice little penalty here. Ardie Savea on the jackal, literally on his own 5-metre line. Absolutely desperate. A great game from him in this one as well. Absolutely committing those players in to just get those jackal penalties, managing to move up the field. We get to the next series after the line out, and Jasper Wiese goes off his feet in the clear out. So just immediately, you go from being absolutely under the most amount of pressure to just relieving 60 metres all the way up the field. It's just something South Africa just want to kick out. As soon as they were back in their defensive line, New Zealand were not making any ground. The only way New Zealand were moving up the field was through these penalties, really. Eventually, this did actually go to a potential point-scoring opportunity for Jordie Barrett. There was a scrum that was actually South Africa's scrum. It looked pretty even. It was beginning to even out by this point, not really gaining those penalties. Damien Dialende, for whatever reason, decides to run a really hard flat line while the ball is still in the scrum. The ball got passed out, went to him. Referee immediately called for offside. One of those very sort of technical penalties that if you know the rules, you just know you're not allowed to do that. So maybe just thought chances are maybe it would go well. To be fair, he might have made some really good ground on that, but it was picked up. A nice little easy 3 for Jordie Barrett just to kick over, just to bring them in on that scoreboard a little bit, because I really think this half could have ended 10-0 if it wasn't for little mistakes like that. And then eventually New Zealand did get back on the attack. The South African defence towards that final 5 minutes looked a bit scrambly, not going to lie. It didn't really look the most organised, but it was effective. So, hey, if it works, it works. But it certainly looked like they were just sort of throwing whoever was there at the tackle, but didn't really allow a lot of ground to be made. So nice from them. And finally, there was yet another Malcolm Marx jackal penalty. That will just see out that first half. So we went in a half-time 10-3 up to South Africa. I've got written down here, there was a superb first 30 minutes from South Africa. A very grown-up game, which is, again, just another weird term to use, but it feels like it. They felt mature. They felt organised. They weren't messing about. They were just getting on with their game. It's what you want to be seeing. Controlling the pace of the game, tactical keeping New Zealand pinned back in their own 22, and the set piece looking good. A lot of good positives to come where the only negatives for me, those 4 conceded breakdown penalties between the 30th and 40th minute, just allowing New Zealand to get back in it. If you just get out those mistakes, you're not going to allow New Zealand to get any momentum behind them. From a New Zealand standpoint, struggling to get going massively. Kicking is just a resort of being stuck in both attack and defence. They really weren't putting together these phases to actually make ground. They just constantly trying to kick and get that aerial battle. South Africa, for the basically most of the game, looked like they were winning the aerial battle, so it wasn't really going to lead to anything either way. And just being a bit impatient, just trying desperately to get stuff to work rather than just building the attack and going through the phases. Some of the stats going in at half-time. Penalties conceded 7 versus 4, and you've got to remember South Africa conceded 4 in an incredibly short amount of time. If you take that out, and that stat is 7-0 in penalties, that is a brutal first half. So, just got to cut out those little mistakes. Possession, again, from the Sky Sports coverage that I'm watching over here in the UK, I'm sure if you're in South Africa or New Zealand, you might have some different stats. For me, though, it came up as 50-50 possession. Felt bizarre. I really feel like South Africa had a better possession than that, but this is directly from the Sky broadcast. Maybe there's something that they got wrong there. Territory, 63-37%. Yeah, I think for a good majority of that game, South Africa were in there. About the 15th minute, it was actually something like 87% territory for South Africa, so looking really good. And then finally, turnovers, 3-all. But the turnover rate from South Africa was just immense. I thought Malcolm Marx was playing an absolutely fabulous first half. On to the second half then, and to be honest, it felt a bit like that first half restarting again. A lot of this was really in positives for South Africa. New Zealand were actually managing to hold the defensive line quite well again. They were stripping the ball, but just not really achieving anything with it. We saw very early in that first half Will Jordan getting the ball spread wide to him with just no room. For whatever reason, South Africa were just closing down that defence so quickly that New Zealand weren't giving players like Will Jordan the room to do anything. Kicking the ball upfield, kicking it dead. We saw knock-ons, we saw handling errors, just not really getting going anywhere. There was one really nice break that we got to see from Will Jordan in the 46th minute. There was a lovely little pop inside pass. We saw that during the island tour from New Zealand. They loved that little back pass inside. Will Jordan potentially could have run the length of the field had it not been for Jasper Wiese coming in, getting a lovely tackle, just stopping them. Absolutely brilliant play from him. And South Africa managed to wrap that up. They were actually the ones who scored the first points of this second half, winning a penalty at the scrum. Again, the scrummaging looked like it was going to go the way of South Africa in the second half again at the start. Pollard kicking that over for 3. New Zealand just collapsing that one. Again, these compound issues. New Zealand offside, 52nd minute. Again, another penalty coming in. Now, this was one of the big issues here. Geordie Barrett actually picked up an injury, which meant that, of course, New Zealand got to try and find a workaround for this. So Beauden Barrett moving back into 15. Mo'unga coming on at 10. And I heard the commentator say that maybe this would be a bit of a blessing in disguise. Maybe this would open up for the team a little bit more attacking with Mo'unga in there. You've still got Geordie Barrett covering that backfield. Malcolm Marx went off at this point as well, so a little bit of a threat lessened, you would think, but so many of the other South Africa players doing well. But I really didn't see the switch do a great deal for them. If anything, I actually felt like they lost a bit of shape. I really felt like Beauden Barrett was actually helping them keep this flat, straight line when they were trying to attack whatever it was. It wasn't even a great deal, but he was actually keeping a lot of it. After this, the New Zealand attack actually felt a bit more scrambly to me than it was before, which is incredible because it felt pretty scrambly before. Some more examples now of New Zealand just not quite getting it right. There was a lovely little steal at the line out, and Havili kicked it all the way downfield, pinned South Africa all the way back in their 22, and immediately giving away a penalty at the line out situation, just allowing South Africa an easy exit. This ended up actually leading to the next score of the game, coming in, the drop goal coming in from Andre Pollard, so we just don't get to see enough in World Rugby. I love when there's an actual drop goal. South Africa back on the attack, making good headway. New Zealand actually managed to defend, ripping the ball a couple of times, but just causing knock-ons, fumbles, just not allowing themselves to actually make any ground after doing all the hard work and getting the ball back. Eventually, Andre Pollard realising they weren't making ground themselves, so why not take the easy 3, getting that one over, taking them to 16-3 as we go into the final quarter. And to be honest, it just sort of carries on going this way. It's New Zealand just giving away needless penalties. There was another free kick for just closing the gap at the line-out. Literally players walking into the middle of the line-out. Just bizarre. It was just getting worse and worse for New Zealand at this point. South Africa ended up actually stealing a line-out from New Zealand as well. So eventually these set pieces even beginning to go a bit wrong now for New Zealand. Just beginning to feel the pressure, trying a bit too hard to make things work. New Zealand had the opportunity to actually potentially score something towards this final quarter now. There was a lovely little line out in the South African 22. The driving ball held up by South Africa. Dane Coles managing to get a little bit of a breakaway, sees him going for the white line and gets knocked on in the tackle. Again, just letting South Africa out of these circumstances, not going through these phases, not going wide. Will Jordan screaming on the wing. These forwards just desperate to get over that white line, trying to score some points just to bring them back in the game. I just don't think it was needed. They went for a quick throw a little bit later on, and it got the call as not straight. They just threw it backwards to their own man. So many coach killers is the term you'll probably hear a lot after this game. New Zealand will be really disappointed with how their set piece started going towards the end of this game. Especially when you've got people like Andre Pollard who are just going to punish you for doing these sorts of things. In the 70th minute, there's another penalty coming in from Pollard. Lekanya Am on the jackal in that breakdown situation again. Even though Malcolm Marx is off, there's still plenty of people that are just going to get in there. The New Zealand attack just not looking like it's going anywhere, just throwing the pass to whoever's next in line and hoping they can do something that the inside man couldn't. From the 70th to the 75th minute, we had some pretty immense South African defence. I will say again, as it was in the first half, I have no idea what the defensive setup for South Africa was in this game. It looked chaotic as anything. It was more like Spartan-esque whoever is there, tackle whoever's in front of you. It didn't look like it had a great deal of shape, but so effective. Whatever they were doing, outside of my analysis range, but some really well-deserved defence. Dominant tackles, just driving the back, looking really, really good. Went for the big call here, went for the big kick up and under when they managed to get the ball back. And this is where we have, well, maybe people are going to consider contentious. I don't think it's going to be that contentious, though. We have the red card coming in for Orense, which, yeah, I think for me, as an impartial third party, I think pretty cut and dry. Got to be a red card for me. Went for that high up and under, ran in. Beauden Barrett's really high in the air. I think when he initially left the ground, he actually sort of was looking at the ball, realised he wasn't going to get the tackle, and then actually sort of turned away and just led with the shoulder into Beauden Barrett, caught his own head on the hip of Beauden Barrett and knocked himself out as well in the process, and just took him out in the air. It's one of those just having a bit more awareness. They've been winning the aerial game for so much of the game. He obviously felt confident going for it. Just pulling that trigger a bit too late and probably should have maybe just pulled out of it. So I think the way Beauden Barrett landed, especially with the way the impact was, letter of the law, I think that's a red card. I think most people would probably agree that's a red card. I'll be interested to see what people drop down in the comments where they tell me, no, by barely a penalty. But no, I think that's a red card. I think you've got to give that one. New Zealand did manage to get themselves a bit of a consolidation try. There was a lovely break. Again, a scrappy attack, not doing anything, but have managed with the power of Caleb Clark's horse legs, managing to break through a couple of tackles. Runs a good 60 metres up the field. Superb cover tackle coming in from Damien Valemsa, actually stopping a brilliant try. Anyone that's got him in the Fantasy in our Super Brute League will probably be really annoyed he didn't score that try. Superb tackle, managing to stop the try there. However, superb support from Frizzell, coming in, picking up that ball, just dotting it down over the line. Bit too easy, managing to get over the line there. And Richu Mwanga stepping up. Difficult kick right on the touchline. Kicking it all the way. Getting a nice little conversion there. Bringing them back to South Africa 19, New Zealand 10. Thought that would probably be the full-time whistle. But no, we continue. We've got one score left, going to Willie Leroux, coming in with a lovely try right in that 80th minute. Kickoff went to New Zealand. They were trying to play out. They were trying to find something. Again, it just didn't look like it was going anywhere. A bit of a loose pass goes round the back. I believe it was off Frizzell. I couldn't see the shirt number, but it bounced off his arm, went behind him. Leroux does a nice little grubber kick through, picks up the ball, dots it down for a try. And as I've been saying all match report, Andre Pollard just going to kick that over. He just doesn't miss this boy anymore, playing really well. So the full-time result, South Africa 26, New Zealand 10. And what a confident game. Very, very impressed by South Africa. I have to say, as a Wales supporter, I'm very happy we didn't come up against that South Africa team. I think South Africa was still finding their feet a little bit when they were playing Wales. I think if that game had happened against Wales, I think that could have been a totally different scenario in a couple of those games. This was a very mature, very grown-up game from South Africa. There's obviously a big rivalry in this. They didn't just go in and play wild. They knew what they wanted to. There was structure when they were going into attack. There was obviously a game plan for kicking back. The set pieces looked really well designed. I think overall very, very well played by South Africa, and I think a deserved win. A couple of final stats. Final possession 55-45. Again, I still feel like South Africa had possession for so much of this game. I can't believe that's the possession stats, but there we go. Turnovers 9-7 to South Africa. It definitely felt like it. So many jackal threats from South Africa, just leading the way there. And then finally, penalties conceded, 9 versus 13. And while there was quite a few penalties for South Africa in there, it clearly wasn't really leading to a lot. We aren't seeing that New Zealand score go through the roof, whereas there's clearly a number of points coming from the boot of Andre Pollard. So although there was penalties, I think it's something that South Africa will work on for the next game, just to cut down on needless penalties, or at least compound penalties. If you're giving away one, don't give them away. And to be fair, in the second half, I wasn't really seeing compound penalties. It was more odd things here and there. But New Zealand, wow, I think New Zealand really letting themselves down with a couple of handling errors, a couple of silly penalties, a couple of silly free kicks. Just don't need to happen. But yeah, I think South Africa will be incredibly impressed with that. Malcolm Marks got man of the match, which was really nice for 50th cap. And to be fair, yeah, I think so. I'm going to be interested to see what other people thought maybe they would have gone for man of the match. I did think Kurtley Lorenze was having a great game. I just think the red card, very few people get a man of the match after getting a red card. But I thought for a good part of that game, attacking aerial battle was playing well for him. Defensively, looked solid against Caleb Clark. Thought he had a really good game for not a big guy. Not who I know a lot about. I'm learning a lot about this series as it goes on. So players like that are going to be a bit of a surprise to me. But what an incredible player. Hopefully he will be okay because he did go off on a stretcher as well. Hopefully he'll be coming back next week because I think he's a really good player. But I think probably deserved for Malcolm Marks. But there we have it, guys. That is going to be the match report for Springboks versus the All Blacks. If you've enjoyed this content today, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel just to keep up to date with all the latest videos. Wallabies and Argentina are coming up pretty soon, in about an hour or so for me by the time I'm going to finish recording this. So make sure you are sticking around to see the match report after that game as well. I hope you've all enjoyed today, guys. I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.